The day I returned to that house, the sky felt unnaturally calm, almost as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I stood at the edge of the long driveway, my hands trembling inside the sleeves of my thin coat, staring at the mansion that once echoed with warmth but now loomed like a stranger wearing a familiar face. A soft breeze brushed past me, carrying fragments of old memories, laughter drifting down the stairs, the sound of slippers on polished marble, and the faint smell of sandalwood incense my mother always kept burning in the hallway. But those memories felt distant now, like someone else's childhood, someone else's comfort, someone else's home. I tightened my grip around the small bag I carried, its weight embarrassingly light, holding nothing but a pair of clothes and a few things that reminded me of the life I had left behind. As I approached the front door, my heart pounded so violently that it drowned out every other sound. I knew I should turn back. I knew the moment that door opened, the version of me I had spent years trying to bury might come crashing back to life. But what choice did I have? Life has a strange way of circling you back to the very places you swore you'd never see again. I pressed the doorbell with hesitant fingers, and the familiar chime echoed from inside, sharp, clear, and painfully unchanged. My throat tightened. This house had once been a sanctuary, a place filled with lullabies, promises, and dreams that felt too gentle for the world outside. Now, with each passing second, it felt like a test I wasn't strong enough to face. The door opened slowly, and in that short moment before the light from inside spilled onto my tired face, I felt the weight of every year I had spent away sink into my bones. I wasn't ready. I would never truly be ready. But the path that led me here had already taken away the luxury of choice. And as the warm glow from the doorway revealed the silhouette standing before me, a knot formed in my stomach, because the eyes staring back at me were not welcoming, not relieved, not soft with recognition. They were cold, startled, and edged with a quiet hostility that made my breath falter. In that single instant, even before a word was spoken, I understood something with painful clarity. Coming back here would not be a return. It would be a confrontation, a reckoning, and perhaps the beginning of a truth I had spent my whole life running from. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us like an invisible wall built brick by brick from years of unresolved tension and buried wounds. The woman in the doorway, my mother's sister, the aunt who once held me when I scraped my knee, who braided my hair on sleepy Sunday mornings, looked at me now as though I were an unexpected intruder trespassing into a life that had moved on without me. Her expression flickered between shock and something colder, something guarded, as if my presence threatened a fragile balance she'd worked hard to maintain. The warm light from inside cast a halo around her silhouette, but it wasn't enough to soften the sharpness in her eyes. I stood frozen, searching her face for even the faintest hint of affection or recognition, but all I found was a restrained discomfort, as if my return had reopened a door that was supposed to remain locked forever. Finally, she spoke my name, slowly, cautiously, as though saying it aloud might summon ghosts she thought she had put to rest. Hearing my name from her lips should have felt comforting, but instead it felt like an accusation, like a reminder of all the years I had disappeared, all the explanations still tangled in my throat. She didn't step aside. She didn't welcome me in. She simply stared, waiting for me to justify my existence, waiting for me to explain why after everything, after all the mistakes and all the whispered doubts, I had returned to this house instead of any other. The silence between us thickened, pressing against my chest until breathing felt like swallowing stones. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words scraped against my throat, hesitant and fragile. I had nowhere else to go. I whispered finally, my voice barely audible. She stiffened just slightly, but enough for me to feel it. Enough for me to know that my return wasn't going to be forgiven easily. She glanced over her shoulder into the hallway, as though checking whether someone else might witness this moment, or perhaps hoping someone would step forward to save her from the discomfort of my presence. But no one came. It was just the two of us, standing on the threshold of a home that no longer felt like mine. She stepped back half an inch, not an invitation, not even an act of kindness, just a reluctant shift of weight, and somehow it was enough for me to inch forward. As I crossed the doorway, a chill slid down my spine. The air inside smelled faintly of jasmine and polished wood, a familiar scent that should have embraced me. But instead it twisted with something unspoken, something uneasy. The walls looked the same, the furniture barely changed, the photographs still lined the shelves. But the warmth that once filled this place had vanished, replaced by a silence that felt heavy with secrets. I clutched my bag tightly, my fingers trembling, and for the first time since I arrived, I wondered if coming back here had been a mistake, if the home I had been yearning for lived only in my memory and not in these walls anymore. And as my aunt closed the door behind me, the quiet click of the lock sounded less like safety and more like the beginning of a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. As I stepped further into the house, my footsteps softened against the familiar rugs, but every sound felt magnified, as if the walls themselves were listening, judging, remembering. My aunt walked ahead of me with slow, deliberate steps, neither inviting nor dismissing, simply moving as though she were navigating around a fragile memory that might shatter if handled too abruptly. The hallway stretched longer than I remembered, or maybe it was just the weight of her silence that made every distance feel stretched, every second feel heavier. Pictures lined the wall, old family frames with faces frozen in time, smiles that once felt like home but now stared back at me like distant strangers. I caught sight of one photo, my mother holding me at age 5, her arms wrapped around me as if I were her entire world. My chest tightened. I reached out to touch the frame, but my aunt spoke before my fingers could graze the glass, her voice flat, almost rehearsed. "You should go to your room first," she said without turning, as though avoiding eye contact might shield her from the emotion she didn't want to confront. Her tone held no warmth, only obligation. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it, and followed her without protest. My room, at least the space that used to be my room, sat at the very end of the hall, the door slightly ajar as though waiting for a version of me who never returned. When she pushed it open, a faint smell of lavender drifted out, mixed with the stale scent of a place untouched for years. The room looked almost the same, yet entirely different. My old bed remained, covered with a quilt my mother had stitched herself, but the colors had faded, the corners neatly tucked as if no one had slept in it for ages. A bookshelf stood against the wall, still filled with my childhood novels, their spines worn but undisturbed. My drawings were gone, my posters vanished, the little pieces of me erased with careful, deliberate hands. Only the bare essentials remained, as though someone had tried to preserve the outline of a life without keeping the person who lived it. My aunt stood at the doorway, gripping the frame with both hands, her knuckles pale. "I didn't change anything important," she murmured, her voice strangely stiff. "Just cleaned up a bit." Cleaned up, or removed traces of me she no longer wanted to see. I looked around slowly, absorbing the strange mixture of familiarity and loss that pressed against my ribs like a dull ache. The room felt like a museum, of someone who used to exist, someone people remembered only in fragments. "It's fine," I said quietly, though the words tasted bitter on my tongue. She nodded once, sharp and quick, then added in a low voice, "Dinner will be ready later. Don't wander around too much." And without waiting for my response, she turned and walked away, leaving me alone with a silence so thick it felt alive. I placed my bag on the bed and sat down, the mattress sinking slightly under my weight, releasing a soft creak that echoed through the stillness. My throat tightened as memories rushed in. My mother humming by the window, her touch on my hair. The stories she whispered to me on nights when the world felt too big. The emptiness around me felt unbearable. I buried my face in my hands, trying to steady my breathing. Coming back here had already begun peeling away layers I had buried deep. It was no longer simply a return. It was a reopening of wounds I wasn't certain I had the strength to face. And yet, in the uneasy quiet of this room, I sensed it clearly. The biggest truth, the one I had been running from, was still waiting somewhere inside this house. And sooner or later it would find me. I lay back on the old bed for a moment, hoping the familiar softness might calm the turmoil inside me, but instead it amplified the ache in my chest. Every creak of the mattress felt like a whisper from the past, pulling me deeper into memories I had spent years trying to outrun. As the quiet settled around me, I became painfully aware of the faintest sound drifting through the house, the ticking of the hallway clock, echoing in the same steady rhythm it had kept since my childhood. It was unsettling how so many things here remained untouched, yet everything inside me felt shattered beyond recognition. I rose to my feet, unable to stay still any longer, and opened the window. A surge of cold evening air slipped into the room, brushing against my skin like a reminder of the world outside. A world that felt distant, almost unreachable. My eyes drifted toward the backyard, where the old swing still hung from the maple tree, swaying gently though no one sat on it. I remembered the afternoons my mother would push me on that swing, her laughter rising into the wind, her voice so full of life and hope. The memory hit me with a force so sudden I had to steady myself against the windowsill. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply, fighting back the tears burning at the edges. As I turned away from the window, something caught my attention. A faint outline under the bed, half hidden in shadow. Curiosity tugged at me. I knelt down, reaching in with hesitant fingers, and pulled out a small wooden box covered in a thin layer of dust. My heart skipped. I recognized it immediately. It was my mother's box, the one she used to keep her most treasured things in, the one she never let anyone touch. Why was it under my bed? Why here? My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside lay delicate items wrapped in faded cloth. A dried flower pressed between two sheets of old paper, a small silver earring missing its pair, a yellowed photograph of my mother holding me as a baby. But beneath these sentimental pieces was something else. An envelope with my name written on it in her handwriting. My breath caught. My mother's handwriting had always been soft, slightly tilted, as though every letter carried a bit of her gentleness. Seeing it now felt like being struck by lightning and embraced at the same time. My fingers hovered over the envelope, afraid to touch it, afraid of what truth it might contain. Why had she hidden it? When had she written it? And why had no one ever told me? Before I could gather the courage to open it, I heard footsteps approaching the hallway, slow, steady, too cautious to be accidental. I quickly slid the envelope back inside the box, closed it, and pushed it under the bed just as the footsteps stopped right outside my room. A soft knock followed, hesitant but deliberate. My pulse quickened. My aunt's voice came through the door, thin and strained. "Can we talk?" she asked, though her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. It was something she had been dreading as much as I had. For a moment I considered pretending I hadn't heard, letting the silence swallow the tension between us. But a deeper instinct, the same instinct that had pulled me back to this house, told me that whatever she wanted to say, whatever truth she had held back all these years, was tied to the very thing I feared the most. I swallowed hard, wiped the dust from my trembling hands, and whispered, "Come in." As the door creaked open and she stepped inside, I realized something with chilling clarity. The envelope under my bed held answers, but the woman standing in front of me held the truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. And there was no turning back now. My aunt stepped into the room with a stiffness that made every movement feel rehearsed, as if she had practiced this conversation 1,000 times in her mind and still wasn't sure how to begin. She closed the door behind her with slow, deliberate care, then stood near the dresser, avoiding my eyes as though looking at me directly might break whatever fragile composure she had left. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence pressed heavily between us, thick with all the unasked questions and all the answers she feared would come spilling out if she let her guard slip even for a second. I watched her clasp and unclasp her hands, her fingers trembling slightly, a small betrayal of the calm expression she was trying so hard to maintain. When she finally looked at me, her eyes held a mixture of guilt, exhaustion, and something that resembled fear. "You coming back? It wasn't something we expected," she said quietly. Her voice strained as if every word carried a weight she had been carrying alone for too long. I swallowed, feeling the tension coil tighter in my chest. "I didn't plan it," I whispered. "I just needed somewhere to go." She nodded, but the gesture was hollow, distant, as though she already knew that part. "There are things you don't know," she said abruptly, her voice cracking at the edges. "Things your mother wanted to tell you, but she didn't get the chance." The mention of my mother sent a sharp ache through me, and I held my breath, waiting. My aunt exhaled shakily, rubbing her temples as if trying to steady herself before continuing. After you left, she began. Your mother, she wasn't the same. She tried to hide it, tried to stay strong, but something broke inside her. She kept your room exactly the way it was, even when everyone told her to move on. She said she would wait for you to walk back through that door. A lump formed in my throat, and my voice came out hoarse. Why didn't anyone tell me? She hesitated, her eyes flickering away again. Because she didn't want you to feel guilty. She believed you needed time to build a life, time to heal. She didn't want her pain to pull you back before you were ready. Her words hit me like a tidal wave, drowning me in a guilt so heavy it felt difficult to breathe. I sank onto the edge of the bed, gripping the blanket as if it were the only thing keeping me from collapsing under the weight of the truth. My aunt slowly approached and sat on the chair across from me, her hands twisting in her lap. There's more, she whispered, her voice almost trembling now. Before she passed, she left something for you. Something she told me to give you only when you returned willingly. Not out of desperation, not because you had nowhere else to go, but because your heart brought you back. My breath froze. She didn't know about the envelope I had found moments earlier. Or maybe she did, and she was testing whether I would admit it. But one look at her face, lined with the exhaustion of secrets buried for too long, told me this wasn't a game. This was something deeper. Something she had carried quietly, painfully. Where is it? I asked softly. My aunt lifted her gaze, and for the first time since I arrived, her expression softened. Not with warmth exactly, but with something close to grief. I'll show you, she whispered. But you need to be prepared. What she left behind, it will change the way you remember her. And the way you remember yourself. A chill crawled up my spine. Outside, the wind rattled the window faintly, as if urging me to brace myself for what was coming. My aunt stood up slowly and motioned for me to follow her, her footsteps echoing in the hallway with an eerie heaviness. As I rose from the bed and stepped behind her, I had no idea that the truth waiting for me would not only unravel my past, but also reveal a part of my mother's life I never knew existed. We walked down the hallway slowly, the house unnervingly quiet except for the soft creaking of the wooden floor beneath our feet. My aunt moved as though each step carried a memory she didn't wish to disturb, her shoulders slightly hunched, her breathing shallow. I followed closely, my pulse thudding loud enough in my ears that it drowned out everything else. The air felt heavier with every step, thick with anticipation and the weight of truths lingering just out of reach. She finally stopped at the very end of the hallway, outside my mother's old room. My heart clenched at the sight of the door. Even untouched, it radiated a kind of warmth I had longed for, a warmth that felt both familiar and achingly distant. My aunt placed her hand on the doorknob but hesitated, her fingers tightening as though she were battling the urge to turn back. When she finally pushed the door open, the soft glow of late evening spilled inside, illuminating a room preserved in time. The lace curtains fluttered gently with the passing breeze, the scent of her favorite jasmine still faint in the air, as if she had only stepped out for a moment and would return any second. I stepped inside cautiously, my chest tightening with every breath. Her bed remained neatly made, the knitted blanket folded perfectly at the foot. A small wooden table stood by the window, holding her reading glasses and an unfinished book, its pages slightly curled, marking the last moment she had been here. On the dresser, her jewelry box remained closed, the delicate carvings gleaming softly in the fading light. My aunt walked toward the tall wardrobe in the corner, her movements shaky but determined. She opened it slowly, revealing shelves lined with neatly arranged bundles wrapped in cloth. At first, I thought they were stored belongings, old clothes perhaps or scarves she never parted with. But then my aunt reached for a small, box-shaped object tucked into the middle shelf. She pulled it out with a deep sigh, as though the weight of it was not in its size, but in the truth it held. She turned toward me, her eyes rimmed with the kind of sorrow that made my stomach drop. "This," she whispered, holding the box carefully, "is what she left for you." My breath hitched as I reached out. The wooden box was beautifully carved with floral patterns, the same design my mother used to trace with her fingers whenever she was deep in thought. It felt warm in my hands, unnervingly warm, as if it carried fragments of her touch, her warmth, her love. My aunt stepped back, giving me space, but her gaze never left my face. "She asked me to keep it hidden," she said softly. "She didn't want anyone else finding it. Not even me. She said it was only meant for you." My stomach twisted. I slowly lifted the lid, my hands trembling so violently the hinges rattled. Inside lay a stack of letters tied together with a faded red ribbon. My throat tightened as I stared at them. Each envelope carried my name, written in the soft, tilted handwriting I had once traced as a child. My vision blurred as I lifted the first letter. The paper felt delicate, worn from age and emotion. Before I could unfold it, my aunt spoke again, her voice breaking slightly. "She wrote those during the years you were gone. Every time she missed you, every time she wished she could tell you something, every time she hoped you would come home." My knees weakened and I sank onto the edge of the bed. The room felt suddenly too small, the air too thick, the reality too heavy. My aunt continued, "There's one more thing inside. Something she never told anyone. Something she wanted you to know only when you were strong enough to hear it." My heart pounded painfully as I reached further into the box, and my fingers touched a small, sealed envelope with no name, only a date written on the front. A date that made my breath stop. The day I left home. My aunt turned away, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "This one," she whispered. "She wrote on the night you left. She didn't give it to you because she was afraid it would break you." I stared at the envelope, my chest tightening, my fingertips trembling against its edges. In that moment I understood that everything I thought I knew about my mother, her strength, her silence, her choices, was only a fraction of the truth. And whatever waited inside that envelope had the power to reshape everything. My past, my guilt, my memories, and the version of her I had carried inside me all these years. I sat frozen with the envelope in my hands, staring at the date written on it. The night I left home, the night everything changed. My fingers trembled as I ran them across the ink, imagining my mother sitting at this very desk, writing under the dim glow of the bedside lamp, wiping her tears every few minutes so they wouldn't smudge the words she was trying so desperately to hold together. The room felt suffocating, as though the air itself was thick with every unsaid apology, and every unanswered question that had been left hanging between us for years. My aunt watched me from a distance, her face softened by a sadness she no longer tried to hide, but she remained silent, giving me the space to confront the truth on my own. The envelope felt heavier than paper should ever feel, like it carried the weight of my mother's heart, every unspoken fear, every unguarded moment of love. I slowly peeled it open, my breath shaky and uneven, but before I could unfold the letter, a sudden realization struck me. Once I read it, there would be no going back. Whatever lay inside would become a part of me forever, stitching itself into my memory, carving its truth into every future moment I would live. I hesitated, gripping the letter between my fingers, feeling the faint texture of her handwriting pressed into the page. And then, unable to bear the suspense any longer, I unfolded it. Her words spilled across the paper in soft, delicate strokes, gentle, aching, unbearably tender. She wrote about the night I left, how she had stood at the door long after I disappeared into the darkness, whispering my name into the cold air, hoping I might turn around just once. She wrote that she wasn't angry at me, not even for a moment, that she only blamed herself for being unable to protect me from the world, from circumstances she couldn't control, from the loneliness that had eaten away at both of us in different ways. She confessed that she had wanted to run after me, to hold me, to tell me that no matter how far I went, no matter how long I stayed gone, her love would follow me like a shadow that refused to fade. But she was afraid. Afraid that chasing me would push me further away. Afraid that loving me too loudly might make me feel trapped. Afraid that she would lose me completely. And then near the end her handwriting trembled. She wrote that she had always known one day I would return. Not because circumstances forced me. Not because life brought me to a dead end. But because she believed that love, real love, never breaks beyond repair. When you come back, she wrote, I hope you find peace here. Not just with this house. Not just with the memories. But with yourself. By the time I reached the final line, my vision had blurred completely. Tears spilled freely, splashing onto the paper, mixing with the faded marks of her own tears from so many years ago. I held the letter to my chest, as though pressing it closer might somehow bring her back, even for a heartbeat. My aunt stepped forward slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal, and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. She loved you more than anything in this world, she whispered, her voice breaking. She waited for you every single day. The words pierced through me, carving a hollow ache that felt both unbearable and strangely liberating. I realized then that all the guilt, all the pain, all the years I had spent running were not because I had failed her, but because I had never truly understood how deeply she loved me. I folded the letter carefully, placing it back into the box, treating it like something sacred. My aunt handed me a small key, delicate, rusted, the metal cool against my palm. She wanted you to have everything, she said quietly. The house, her things, her memories. They're yours now. I looked around the room, taking in the quiet, the stillness, the lingering hint of her presence. And for the first time since I'd returned, I felt something shift inside me, not closure, not yet, but the beginning of healing. I clutched the box close to my heart as I whispered to the empty room, I'm home, Mama. The silence answered softly, almost lovingly, as if the walls themselves had been waiting to hear those words. That night, long after my aunt had gone to her room and the house had fallen into a deep, heavy silence, I sat alone with the small wooden box in my lap, unable to let it out of my sight. The jasmine-scented air drifted softly through the half-open window, mingling with the quiet hum of crickets outside. For the first time since returning, the house didn't feel like it was pushing me away. Instead, it felt like it was breathing with me. Slowly, painfully, as if it too carried the weight of everything left unsaid. I leaned back against the cold wall and unfolded one of the letters again, running my fingers over my mother's handwriting as though I could touch her through the ink. Every sentence carried her warmth, her longing, her unbreakable love, and reading them felt like being stitched back together, fragile piece by fragile piece. Yet beneath that comfort lay a raw ache, reminding me of all the years I had wasted, all the moments I had traded for silence. Guilt pressed against my ribcage like a dull, stubborn blade. I didn't cry loudly. I simply let the tears slip down my cheeks silently, as though my grief itself was trying not to disturb the sleeping house. When I finally gathered the courage to open the envelope dated the night I left, the world around me seemed to hold its breath. The words inside were shorter than I expected, written with a shaking hand, like she had been fighting time, fighting pain, fighting her own heart. She wrote that she wasn't losing me. She was letting me go because she believed love wasn't ownership. She wrote that she hoped someday I would forgive myself, not just for leaving her, but for forgetting that I deserved love too. And then in the very last line, she wrote something that broke me open in a way nothing else ever had. If the world becomes too heavy, come home to me. Even if I am not here, this house will always open its door for you. I pressed the letter to my forehead, my tears soaking into the fragile paper. In that moment I realized she hadn't only left me memories. She had left me a place to belong, a place to return to when everything else fell apart. As the earliest light of dawn crept through the curtains, painting the room in soft gold, I made a silent promise. I wouldn't run anymore. I wouldn't carry guilt like an anchor tied to my soul. I would live the way she wanted me to, softly, bravely, fully. I would rebuild myself in the house that held her love in every corner, every shadow, every breath of jasmine. I walked to the window, watching the sky shift from gray to pink, and for the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar blooming quietly inside me. Hope, fragile yet unbroken. My aunt appeared silently in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl, her expression softer than I had ever seen it. For once, she didn't look guarded or distant. She looked human, vulnerable. You look like her when you stand like that, she whispered. I didn't turn. I only smiled faintly. I finally understand her, I said. My aunt walked in slowly, stopping beside me, and together we stood in the soft glow of morning, two people bound by loss, by regret, by a love that refused to die even after the person who carried it was gone. The house felt different now, not haunted by absence but warmed by memory. And as the first rays of sunlight touched my face, I realized the truth I had been running from all my life. Sometimes coming home isn't the end of a story. Sometimes it's the beginning of the one you were always meant to live.